In 2019, we began to build our dream.
But the journey started long before you were invited to watch.
We walked a path that spanned nearly 2 decades.
There were times of joy, pain, and everything in between.
Our lives have completely changed, and we're ready to tell you how it happened.
We're not holding back.
Our mistakes, regrets,
What we wish we could change, our best decisions.
and if we do it again, you'll hear it all.
Come back in time with us behind the camera and answer the question,
Is self-building worth it?
All right, welcome back to Mr. Post Frame. Is self-building worth it? I mean, in the last video, there was a part of me that was like, I don't know if this was worth it. But anyway, if you guys want to design a Barndominium, we have a design company called Back 40 Buildings Company. I think we do a really good job designing. So if you're interested, we will leave a link for that. Also, for you guys that want to self-build, self-GC, not only will our plans help you, but our Patreon group will help you because it's a group of other self-builders. You get to share your build on there. We have lives. You get to ask me questions. It's just a great way to gain knowledge on post frame and the do's and don'ts. So check that out. Today's video is going to be on our storm shelter. And so I'm going to let Emily talk a little bit about your options because a Barndominium is typically on a slab. And if you are in an area where you have tornadoes or shady weather, you got to have some options. So what are those?
Yes, so we get that question quite frequently. We live in Iowa. A lot of you guys considering Barndominiums are in Tornado Alley areas of the country. And so your storm shelter options expand beyond just a traditional basement. You can there are companies out there that have FEMA approved storm shelters that can be bolted to your floor above ground. They can be buried under the ground inside of your structure. They can be buried in the ground outside, like a cellar type situation. And so those are more the pre-made options. Then you do have the options where you can design a reinforced room in your home. So you can do that either by reinforcing it with plywood. That would not technically label it as an official shelter, but it is stronger than something would be normally. We do have other clients that they pour concrete walls or do blocks for a room in their house, and some people may use that as a safe and as their shelter or something like that. And then the option that we went with was actually digging out a basement room underneath of our garage. So it was built as you would normally build a basement, and you can do post frame construction over a basement. Paul can kind of explain that a little bit more, but this is just a roughly 20 by 14 room underground. It does have 2 windows in it, which people say that makes it not, it is not an completely enclosed shelter, but it operates as a basement would.
Yeah, so we'll go through the video. But this room right here is 20, and it's gonna be roughly about 13, 14 feet this way. And I'm gonna put the storm shelter underneath that, and I'll have access to it through this room. So I'm gonna mark this off, and then I'm gonna dig out down so I can figure out what my grade is at the bottom and start forming up my footing. I had, the way I designed our garage is for it to be 40 foot deep because there were some things I wanted to incorporate in the garage. One was a canning kitchen. I wanted our utility room in there, and we'll cover why I placed the utility room where I did. And then I wanted what I thought was going to be kind of my man cave area. And then under that, I'm like, that'd be a perfect place for me to put a small basement. And there's a couple things with that. If you have to pay somebody to do it, it's gonna cost you a lot of money. My great-grandfather taught my grandfather, and then my grandfather taught my dad and uncle, which I ended up learning how to make my own forms out of 3/4 inch plywood. So although this was a very physically demanding method, I made all of my own concrete forms. I excavated, made my concrete forms, and then I repurposed that plywood on the roofs of my porch. So I guess just right off the bat, if I had to go back and do it all over again, and I DIY'd it, I would use ICF blocks.
Yes.
Now, I did this whole 20 by 14 at that time. I think it was around $3,500 for the plywood, which I repurposed, all of the, wall ties, all of that stuff. I had $3,500 into it. So that is really, really cheap. If I would have used ICF blocks, that cost would have went up quite a bit, but it would have saved me a lot of labor in the fact that the ICF is the form, you pour the concrete in it, and you're done.
Yes, I mean, I think that at several points in this process, you got lucky that nothing went wrong. And this is one of those instances. When you were doing this shelter, it was 90, 100 degrees outside all day. There's virtually no there were no trees up around the build site to provide shade. We didn't have any structure on the property that you could have gone into.
I did have I had a enclosed trailer that had 2 stories in it though, full of tools.
Yeah, eight foot high and 2 stories?
Yeah.
Yeah, so no, you did not have a proper place to go escape the heat. And so you being alone, we kind of got lucky that nothing happened.
Yeah. But this, honestly, I would do this again this way. I just, knowing what I know now, I've done some ICF foundations. I would do that because they were light, it was easy to maneuver, and there's no tear down.
Right.
There's a lot of work in this. You can obviously do it cheap, but there is a lot of physical labor. And the last video, obviously, I laid out the structure, and I did that before putting gravel and all that down because I wanted to get my storm shelter dug. In this storm shelter, once I got the walls poured and all that, you'll see later that I backfilled with rock all the way around it. And the reason I backfilled with rock, which was a couple loads, which cost, was probably around $1,000 just for that. I was worried that if I backfilled with dirt on the interior where our garage was going to be, that I wouldn't be able to get it compacted enough. And I know I wouldn't have because I also had problems with our retaining walls that went over backfilled dirt where I thought I was going to, and it didn't,
Right.
So I'm glad that I backfilled with the gravel.
Yes. Yeah. So there's definitely some things to consider with this. This ended up coming in handy for us because we moved into the garage in late 2020. And so we used this room as our kids' bedroom. And then the room above it was our bedroom. And because you built it up about a foot above the rest of the slab in the garage, it created this private room, which worked out really well for the bedroom situation and sleeping arrangements while we lived in the garage. So we have used it for a lot of different things.
And I guess my thought process with this is I know it's not technically, a certified storm shelter, but it's below ground. It's 8-inch concrete walls. Over the floor, I have 2 layers of 3/4-inch plywood that is screwed down. I do have windows, 6-foot window wells with windows. It's on the east side of the house. Primarily, any storms that we get are going to come out of the southwest or northwest, like tornado storms.
Yes.
So I was confident that the house tipped over, that's the way it could go. And we can cover those if we needed to. Those could be covered. I just want to be underground so we don't get sucked away or crushed.
Yes. So and the thing to keep in mind is that there's no 100% guarantee if a tornado comes directly over your home. Like there's nothing to give yourself like 100% guarantee that you won't be injured.
Because you have to make it there.
Yes,
you have to be paying attention and you have to make it there.
Yeah, so there's pros and cons with all of the different shelter options. In some areas you have to worry about if you bury something underground, you have to worry about flash flooding, and that can be very problematic for some people. If they're above ground, you have to be mindful of the amount of room that it's going to take up in your plan, but we do highly encourage everybody to have some sort of plan for escaping a storm. And we've been very fortunate. We haven't had to use our shelter a whole lot. But one of the times that we did have to use it was in March of 22 when a tornado actually came through Madison County, and some people did lose their lives. They were instances where everybody was above ground.
Yes. And they didn't really know it was coming.
That was the other problem. Yes, that there was some way there was no escaping it because nobody knew it happened until
it was too late.
It was too late. Yeah. So, so those are the things to keep in mind when it comes to planning out your build. Is you want to have a solution that you feel really confident and comfortable with, because you have to live with the consequences of that decision, good or bad.
Right.
And so you don't want to go off of the advice of other people. You want to do your research, and then you want to make the correct choice for your family.
Yeah. And I would say even, we talk about some things we probably should talk about in here is as I went through this, people are saying self-building, but what about your time? What about your time? Your time is money. And that is true to a certain point, but listen, there is no way that we could have afforded to build this or pay somebody to build this. It wouldn't have been feasible, right? So even though we talk about, we made that big mistake where our gravel cost us $10,000, we saved hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of this build.
Yes. What we found is that a typical home building project, or no matter who you're using to build your home, no matter what type of build it is, having somebody hired out to build the entire thing start to finish, you're going to spend anywhere from 40 to 60% on labor. And so, which some of you guys might think that is completely untrue or completely ridiculous or anything like that. It's like the fact of the matter that it is true. Like, there is a lot of labor that goes into home building. And so when you think about, people saying, well, it's your time. We didn't have careers at that point that even if we had worked those jobs or worked all the overtime we possibly could, you wouldn't have made
us enough money to pay somebody to do it.
No, you wouldn't have made enough money to compensate for that. So, and some of you guys, that is true. You do make enough money that would offset that. And so great, hire a builder, have the whole thing done start to finish. But for a lot of people, you would have had to work 15 years to make the extra, $300,000-$400,000 that it would have cost to hire somebody to build this for us.
Yeah, 100%. And you also have to decide, what's important to you. And part of that is going to be how much money you make at your current job. Because if you make a lot of money, then you're better off paying somebody to do it than if you were to do it yourself. You have to take into consideration your level of skill. We all have to know what our capabilities are, what our limitations are. Mm-hmm. And everybody has some kind of spare time, free time, I guess. Mm-hmm. And you have to decide, what do you want to do with that? Do I want to go on vacations, or do I want to spend that time self-building? And for us, we did want to go on vacations, but we also wanted to be out here on a piece of land worse, I guess, because it's almost like this is our vacation.
Right. I mean, yes, we decided that we wanted to live somewhere that a lot of people would want to go to escape. And it's like, well, why can't we make the escape your everyday life? And and also, like, even if you do make a lot of money, there's people that, if you aren't enjoying what you're doing and you're saying, I would rather have freedom in my life and more time with my family, and I'd rather do something like this, like to challenge myself. I mean, that's a viable option too. So
my lack of knowledge here, do you have to do this first, or can you do this after your clears? Does it matter?
Yeah, it matters.
Okay.
So Justin brought up a good point. So if you're going to do a storm shelter that's underground, if it is going, like mine, the back of my storm shelter wall is the back wall of my garage. So I had to do this first because I was gonna be digging down. I wanted 8-foot ceilings down there, so I had to excavate a lot further down than I would have for piers. So it was important that I did this first. That's why I laid out, dug my storm shelter, backfilled with gravel, and then put my piers in. I also was cognizant of where I put that so a pier wouldn't land really close to the edge of where I had excavated. If I would have done that, I could have made it work, but I would have had to have drilled way down to get to undisturbed soil, which would have been really difficult backfilling with gravel. So those are things to think about. a storm shelter in the multiple of 16 would be a great option, because you could land that storm shelter on one, where one pier would be and an ending pier, and then you'd have an 8 feet over to the next pier, so you wouldn't be disturbing that soil. So the only time you wouldn't really need to do this first is if it was somewhere in the inside of the structure that wasn't gonna mess with the excavation of the piers.
Do you have to go, Emily mentioned the 1 foot up, step up, do you recommend doing that? Do you have to do that?
Yeah, so when you see our storm shelter finished, it sits up probably about 6 inches above the concrete floor in the garage, and I did that for a couple reasons. One, I was trying to think ahead when the kids have driver's licenses and they throw it into drive instead of reverse, that there would be some kind of stop there to keep them from driving through my storm shelter. The most important one is I wanted to be able to control water. So if I bring in the skid steer or cars, or I want to wash down the garage, my storm shelter foundation walls were 6 inches above the concrete, so I wouldn't have to ever worry about water, going down into the storm shelter. Mm-hmm. And another reason that I wanted it up, even though it did make a step up into the room, is because I wanted higher ceilings. We have 10-foot garage ceilings, and then I planned for an 8-foot in that basement area, so I could raise the floor a little bit and still get really usable space both below and above. Mm-hmm. So those are the reasons why I did it. One, the most important was for water mitigation, and then the other reasons are just kind of personal design reasons. So a couple tools. You're definitely going to need to rent something to excavate your hole with. Depending on how big the hole is going to depend on the machine you get. I was able to reach do all the excavation with a backhoe that had an extended backhoe on it. So if you do something a lot bigger, you're going to have to get a bigger piece of equipment, and it's going to get a little bit more difficult. But some of the tools that I thought were imperative is one, a rotary laser. Setting your forms for your footing, you want to make sure those are perfectly level. Getting all of that stuff done properly is key. It would be very, very beneficial if you're going to do forms like I did, where you use the 3/4 inch plywood, to have an extra set of hands. Make life a lot easier, because of those ties. I was able to come up with a way where I could secure my outside walls, then do the interior walls, and have a way of holding those ties. Otherwise, you're going to need somebody to help you. And then basic hand tools. I had just a screw gun and a circular saw. The biggest thing is the rotary laser and the backhoe to excavate your site.
Did you have any comments or anything, like people?
Yeah, were there any comments in that? That's a great idea. Look at the comments that we had on the videos.
Doing this work solo is nuts. You are dedicated.
My crew would have done it in 5 minutes. Yes, they would have. And it would have been 20 grand.
Right, exactly. It makes sense to have a storm shelter within the house, as the Hurricane Ida has done lots of damage. Perhaps you have tornadoes in Iowa too. Yes, we do. I would recommend anyone putting in footings, walls, or sonotubes use balsa rebar, because they are strong and won't rust ever. Saw this section in your other bigger video on Fast Forward and had to come look how you managed to do it. These videos are great info, man. Awesome.
Got one happy customer.
Yeah, we do. The 2x4 notch is brilliant. Wow.
Yeah, so I guess I can talk about that. Like in the footing, and this is how I determine this. If you live in a code enforced area, they'll just tell you what you got to do. But my thoughts on a keyway. So in the footing is what your wall sits on. And a key is, how I create a key is I take a 2x4, set it flush, so it creates a 2x4 void in the footing. So when I form up my wall and I pour that concrete, the concrete is filling that, locking that wall onto your footing. Say I'm doing a 4-foot frost wall for a house where there's going to be backfill on both sides of that wall. I don't typically put a key in. However, I will have rebar going from the footing into the wall. When I pour a foundation where it's going to be a basement or there's going to only be backfill on one side, I put a key in because that key is going to help, help with that ground pressure against that wall, and it can't push that wall off the footing. I mean, that could hypothetically happen if you had enough hydraulic pressure, but that's kind of my thought process when I do it. If I'm going to have a basement or no backfill on one side, I'll put a keyway in. If I'm going to have backfill on both sides, I don't put a keyway in, but I still tie it together with rebar because you have equal forces pushing against each other, keeping that wall where it needs to be.
Mm-hmm. And
that seems like common sense, right?
Yeah, it works for me. And if you wanted to do an above ground safe room with poured concrete walls, could you use the key system in your slab the same way?
I mean, yeah, you could. I don't know, the purpose, you really wouldn't necessarily need to do that because you don't have the pressure of the ground. I mean, that's the purpose of it, is to keep the ground from pushing the wall off of the footing. Mm-hmm. Even though there's rebar in there, there is, I suppose, certain situations where enough hydraulic pressure. But I mean, we built on the top of the hill in order to avoid as much water issues as possible, so.
Yeah. Yeah. Hi, thanks for all your videos. After what you've done, do you think the best equipment to buy, excavator, backhoe, or skid steer? I think you still...
I would say skid steer.
Yeah.
And then rent the other ones as you need them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for the overall.
Yeah. For
continued use and mm-hmm. things like that. And what are the footer dimensions? How wide, how deep, how thick?
We will put a link in the original video because I did put the size in there. I think I did 16-inch wide, used 2x8 forms, so they're roughly 8 inches deep. And then my wall, I did an 8-inch wall. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Someone asked if we do this on all our builds, and we do not do this on.
I would not do this for some, like we would hire a concrete contractor with forms and everything else if somebody wanted this.
Right. Yeah. Most of our clients are opting to buy something pre-made. We did have somebody that just built one in their garage and had, as part of the design and stuff like that. So, the basement option is not typically what people are choosing because of the additional cost. And then also, you have in-floor heat above it, but it's not going to be nearly as efficient as it is in the concrete. And so a lot of people don't want to lose a bunch of that area, which you can put it in the, if you do a basement, you can put in-floor heat in the basement. But as you guys know, Barndominium's, the slab is a pretty popular reason why people go this route. Let's see.
Anything you would have changed or done different?
Would I have changed it? I mean, I'm pretty happy with the storm shelter. I guess the only thing I would have done differently in that area is I would have added a bathroom because it could have been like a little apartment suite.
Oh, the storm shelter?
Yeah, like in that whole area. Right next to the storm shelter room, we have our canning kitchen. And so one of my I think both of our biggest regrets is that not just because we lived in the garage, but like having a bathroom in that area would have been a really good thing to do.
Yep, definitely.
Which there are ways I could do it, but I'm not doing it.
Yeah, next house
if we do that. But that would be my biggest regret of that, is not having a bathroom incorporated into that area right there.
Thanks everybody for watching. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, go ahead and do that. Share us with your friends, and we'll catch you on the next video.
Yes.